Well, as we say,
We're not bitter, but we're being thwarted.
we're getting sick at heart, I'll tell you that.
We were talking about bitterness and
The cold,
sick at heart.
the
and
cold, we were talking about the cold, how often Shakespeare talks about the cold. I was quoting the tape,
Blow,
erased
blow.
it, they erased it. Blow, blow, thou winter wind, thou art not so unkind as man's ingratitude. What a bitter thing ingratitude is. It's as cold as that north wind. And we experience it a little bit. We walk out of one heated building into the cold, and we say, "Ooh, that's a sharp wind," and then we dodge into our car, our heated car, or into our room, and we don't really experience the bitter cold at all. Mr. Senior was saying that the ski lodge is the perfect example of
It's such
this.
luxury. It's the lack of luxury. They
Everybody.
stand around in their thermal underwear and drink expensive drink, hot
Yes.
buttered rum.
Around expensive fireplaces with big roaring fires.
And then they talk about facing the mountains and the elements.
Yeah.
Oh, gee.
No, that was one of the things that students experienced in Ireland was the bitter cold. I have never been so cold in my life as I was in Ireland. And I
really think you're going to die.
Yeah. When the first few weeks were simply unbearable. There was no way to get warm. The rooms were never warm. It warmed up during the day a little bit. But
I remember when you and I went together for the first time to the island where we stayed. We were on a reconnaissance trip, and we discovered this place. We were reconnoitering to try to find a good place. And I remember the day we went to the little port where the boat docked. It took us to the island, and we were waiting for the boat. And we went into this little bar, and I can remember in a soft voice entreating the barmaid, and she was somebody. I said, "Is it possible to get a cup of hot tea?" Because I was dying. My teeth were chattering. I had some kind of pneumonia. I was in pain, and she was quite gruff about it. Well, we don't. This is a bar. I mean, we don't say if you want tea, you go to a tea house. And of course, being a woman, she melted fine. She realized that I was suffering, and a suffering man is
irresistible.
Right? So she got me a whiskey tea, a hot.
Oh yeah.
She compromised, and she got some tea.
Toddy.
She poured some toddy in. But I can remember, and I've been frequently that way. That is, you really think you get gentle toward other people because you need their help. You don't swagger in there and say, "Damn it, I want this or that." You really are at the edge of your ability to go on. Cold, bitter, cold.
Well, I've had a little bit of military service. I went on guard duty for a little while when I was in the military. And it was in the wintertime. It was in North Carolina, but it was still awfully cold to go out there alone, for 3, 4, 5 hours at a time, nothing to do at all except kind of walk up and down. It's tedious, it's depressing. It's even there was no question about there being anybody out there to trouble you.
No, but it's midnight.
But it's midnight. It's dark, and you don't know who's there, and it's scary. You're young, and it's scary, and you're cold. You're cold right through. That's what we mean by reality. Shakespeare knows all about it. He knows how those guards feel about it.
There are university people who have written books to prove that Shakespeare indeed was a graduate of Oxford. He must have been, they say. How otherwise could he be known so much? There are people who write books to prove that he went to the law school, to the Inns of the Court, because he knows so much about the law. There are people who think that he must have been involved in military service because he knows so much about the army. There are people who think he must have been to sea or whatever. And all of that is nonsense. Shakespeare never went to any of those places.
Must have been in the court. He must have been in the court because he knows all about the court.
How could he know? Well, then other people say, well, he was a genius. No, I won't buy either of those. He was neither well educated nor was he a genius. Well, I suppose he was a genius, but that's not the reason why he knew.
He was
what
a great
knew.
poet. He was a great poet, we say, and what do we mean by what is poetic gift? It is a gift, all right. I have to admit that. It's the gift of being able to realize what experience is just from experience rather than from books. Because after all those people who say, well, especially people who say he studied medicine or he studied law or he studied this or that, that's all book learning. But you can learn about those things without books. And you can learn about military life without being a military man yourself. That is, there were soldiers all over the place. And those soldiers were in the bars. And Shakespeare went to the bars, and he met and drank with those soldiers, and he found out what military life is like by listening to those men, by talking.
I don't think he ever forgot anything.
Yeah.
He had a memory.
And he could put, the thing is, he had the gift of the poet, which is imagination. That is, he could enter into their life. He didn't just listen to them. When they talked, when they grumbled about what it was like to stand on guard duty in some terribly cold place, he not only listened to them, but he entered into their lives in some way, so that he I use the word realized what their life was like. He picked up their language. He knew the way they talked, the way they felt about things, because he was quick to imagine imagine their lives. That is, to represent it in his own mind in the form of images, sensory images, the sounds and the smells and the tastes and all of those sensible images that you get when you see and when you listen, when you experience things.
We've talked about that right from the beginning. That is, we talked about Homer's ability to see the details of things, and it comes back in Shakespeare.
And that's, of course, that it cultivates in you. That's what we said from the beginning. You have to imagine this scene. If you don't imagine it, you won't get it. You'll just run right through that scene without it making any impression on you.
If you're looking for ideas, there isn't an idea in it.
No ideas at all. Have you had a quiet guard? Not a mouse stirring. There he goes again. Not a mouse stirring. See, not even a mouse.
It's a popular Christmas.
The night before Christmas. Not
they
a creature
picked that up from
stirring.
here.
Not even a mouse. Well,
or they picked it up from mice.
It's just a commonplace. Mice are quiet, and
they stir all night.
They make little stirrings. when you hear them, they make the slightest little stirring. Otherwise, you don't hear them. But not a mouse stirring. Well, good night. If you do meet Horatio and Marcellus, the rivals of my watch, bid them make haste, he says. He wants to be relieved right on time. He doesn't want them to be late. And lo and behold, they appear right then. Did I hear them? Stand, ho, who is there? Friends to this ground and legion to the Dane. Oh, Marcellus says, oh, farewell, honest soldier.
You know those phrases, it's been done to Shakespeare that every single word of his has been taken out of context and turned into a kind of greatness that isn't there.
Yeah, that's right.
But in a way it is there. That is, what a lovely phrase that is. Honest soldier. Doesn't mean much more than good, I suppose.
Well, honest is a mighty word.
It's a mighty word.
It does mean.
But as Marcellus uses it, I suppose it just means nothing more than.
It's just an ordinary kind of compliment.
But you could write a whole dissertation called "Honest soldier. Just as you could on Bitter Cold or Not a Mouse Stirring.
You can imagine a kind of funeral commemoration of someone you knew.
Farewell, honest soldier.
Farewell, honest soldier. What a thing to say.
We do that to a great poet. We take his words out of context and put them to our use, which is fine. It's a perfectly good thing to do.
It's one of the best things. In fact, it's one of the most tangible benefits of reading poetry, reading Shakespeare, is that your mind, if you read him, your mind is filled with those phrases that will come back to you, perhaps.
I wouldn't want to make
fortuitously.
I wouldn't want to make a parody of it, but I think if you picked up a novel by Ernest Hemingway, let's say, and you started off on the first page, you'd be pretty hard pressed to find a funeral oration based upon the words.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
That is, these words are very simple, very plain. They're exactly the words that these plain, ordinary soldiers would use, but they are they're all poetry. They're grounded in a reality which is immediately available at any time and any place. There's really nothing like this in the whole world. Dante, for example, is a very learned man, a very bookish man, who had a sense of reality also. He had both. But Shakespeare, well, Chaucer would be another one. Chaucer wasn't a learned man either. We didn't talk about that.
No.
But he really was. He was a little more learned
than Shakespeare.
He knew, he did some translations from the French and translations from the Latin. And he did read Dante and Petrarch, so he was more learned than Shakespeare. But not, again, a very great learned man. But Shakespeare may be, this is the first time we've ever brought this question up, but it's a very, very important one. Poetry depends upon common sense. You can have learned poets, but their learning is an impediment to their greatness. Some of them surmount it. They're great poets despite the fact that they're learned. But poetry itself is not a learned thing. And in our time, alas, it's become just the opposite. That is, people think of it automatically as something out of the universities. The last time I talked to a popular audience, about a year ago, in the question period afterwards, a pretty tough guy said, "Well, you seem to be saying we ought to all sit around and read poetry." And he used it with a sense of contempt. And I'm afraid he was right. I mean, he was talking about some kind of phony thing that nowadays passes for poetry.
Well, too, I think that he's been ruined by his education. He has been taught that Shakespeare is something highfalutin. That is, when he read Shakespeare in high school, he was told that this is some sort of exalted thing.
Take off your shoes.
Yeah, right.
This is holy ground.
Yeah, he never got any sense of the reality of Shakespeare at all. He was made to feel a fool in front of Shakespeare, that he didn't understand anything.
So he resents it.
So he feels resentment against it.
You sympathize with him. That is, given the modern condition, he's quite right. We've often talked about this, and I know that we've elicited that response from a lot of people. "Oh, you seem to think that all we have to do is sit around and read poetry." And we say, well, yeah, but you don't understand what we mean by poetry.
Yeah, that's right. That poetry is not just some sort of frivolous diversions for decadents who savor the exquisite phrasing of things, and people who are aesthetes.
The Shakespeare industry today is just disgusting. It really is. It has been for a long time.
They immediately begin talking about the structure of the play, the structure of the images, things of that sort, and they begin to talk to you about the technical terms for the figures of speech and things of that sort. They make it into a kind of science or into a kind of aestheticism, either of which destroys the reference to reality that is the main point of the whole thing. The purpose of poetry is to refer us to the reality, to make us see the reality and to have some experience of it.
Look how it goes. Just quickly, the new men come on, and Bernardo says, "Say, what is Horatio there?" And Horatio's first introductory speech is very short, laconic as Horatio is. He says, "A piece of him."
Horatio never answers a question directly. There's a little glimpse of the character of Horatio.
Right there.
He says, a piece, a little mildly humorous remark, but it's absolutely typical of him. He never gives you a direct answer to anything. He's a very cautious man. Horatio is.
He's the only completely good man in this whole play.
He's the only completely honest, to use the word honest, except maybe for Francisco, who doesn't play any role in the play at all.
Of the major characters.
Yeah, of the major characters, he's the only character. I noticed that I have a note written on the first page that makes that point. That is that, except for Horatio, everybody else in the play is not what they seem to be. They're all playing some part. They're all pretending to be something other than they are. They're duplicitous, whereas he is always just what he is. Horatio is always just plain, ordinary Horatio. He is what he is, and downright man who has nothing to conceal, whatever, an honest man.
And Bernardo says, "Welcome, Horatio. Welcome, good Marcellus." And Marcellus says, "What? Has this thing appeared again tonight?" Now Shakespeare doesn't tell you what it is.
Yeah, he's been leading up to this all the time.
Why are they afraid?
Everybody's jittery and they want people, come on, I hope they come quickly, and I'm so glad to be relieved, and I'm sick at heart. And you're saying, what's going on here anyway? This thing appeared again tonight.
I have seen nothing. Horatio says this but our fantasy, and will not let belief take hold of him, touching this dreaded sight twice seen of us. Therefore I have entreated him along with us to watch the minutes of this night, that if again this apparition come, he may approve our eyes and speak to it. Tush, tush, 'twill not appear. Sit down a while, and let us once again assail your ears that are so fortified against our story, what we have tonight seen. Well, sit we down, and let us hear Bernardo speak of this. Last night of all, when yond same star that's westward from the pole had made his course to illumine that part of heaven where now it burns, Marcellus and myself, the bell then beating one, peace break thee off. Look where it comes again. And that is just marvelous. But let's back up a little bit and look at those lines. Bernardo is going to tell the story of what's been happening these last 2 nights. Twice seen of us. 2 nights a ghost has appeared. Between midnight and 1 o'clock, or sometime after midnight.
That's the hour. That's the hour when they walk.
Last night of all, when yond same star that's westward from the pole. And we have to stop right there. We've talked about this before, how important the stars really are. Oh, that's a marvelous scene. I mean, if you're there in the theater and out on that bare stage, he points up and he says, "Yon same star," you begin to see the heavens, right? Shakespeare draws you right into the imaginative place here.
Whether it may be broad daylight, no stars there at all. Shakespeare always wants to remind you, it's dark. It's dark out there. You're in the night.
You may be seeing this play at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Maybe you probably were.
Yeah.
But you see the stars at 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
He has
that power.
Very particular about it. When yond same star, that one right there, he says, that one he points to. That yond same star that's westward from the pole. I have no doubt that he has a particular star or planet in mind, and probably the footnote.
Probably
will
identified
tell us.
it.
Probably identified, but I have no idea what it is.
No.
But I have no doubt it's around Christmas. In fact, it's right at the Christmas
week,
season,
yeah.
and probably you can identify it all right. And probably the audience knew which one they were talking about. It was common law, just that's westward from the pole, just at this time of year. It made his course to illumine that part of heaven where now it burns.
I think the word burns is the best word on the whole page. He might have said shines, but burns. Oh, gee. Have you ever looked up at the sky and noticed that some stars burn? Some don't. Some twinkle and some are very pale. But some stars burn. Really do. Of course, they all, I suppose, burn. The scientists will tell us that they all burn. But what a wonderful word that is.
That's what Frost maybe got his a line of his poem about the stars from that. He says he asks the stars, to identify what he wants to know about the star. He says, "Oh, star, the fairest one in sight." And this is one of the poems that students memorized. I can't remember it from there, but one of the things he says, "Tell us about yourself." And he says, "It says, I burn." That's all it says. That's all the star says. But of course, that's everything about the star. I burn, the star says.
See, there's just so much said so simply. That is what we're doing, is just reading the words that are there, and they're very simple words. We're not talking about sophisticated things. We're not talking about high metaphysical symbols and all that kind of stuff.
No, and nothing very complicated about character. Horatio is a skeptic. It's very clear. Horatio is not a man who believes stories about ghosts. He's a man who you have to convince.
Tush, tush.
He's tush, tush, 'twill not appear. He says that
Tush.
you guys are just seeing things. You get out here in the night, and you're just like all soldiers. You begin to think you see spooks. In the night, you're nervous, and you see spooks. Horatio says, 'tis just our fantasy and will not let belief take hold of him. Now, of course, when the ghost appears, Horatio says, it harrows me with fear and wonder.
Speaks the truth.
He becomes a believer just the minute he sees it. Well, he's not a skeptic anymore. Now he's seen the ghost. He knows. And of course, we know too. Because if Horatio sees it, by gosh, everybody's going to see it, because he's not the kind of guy that's easily deceived.
That's why they put him.
That's why they put him. He's there to testify. They know if he goes back and tells Hamlet this, Hamlet will believe him. If Marcellus goes or Bernardo tells him, he'll say tush tush, till not appear. But not Horatio. But Horatio's a very simple man. There's nothing complicated about Horatio at all. Unlike Hamlet, that's the contrast between Hamlet and some people say Horatio's a kind of foil to Hamlet, and he is, because he's such a simple man. When he sees it, he is harrowed, he says. It harrows me with fear and wonder. That's a metaphor taken from farming. The harrow, that rake that you use to rake up the straw, the wheat. It's like having your soul raked with those steel times. It harrows me with fear and wonder.
I think they use it as a medieval torture as well. That is the harrow taken from the farming, who scarified the body, who used it.
Yeah.
They took a harrow and they drove it over a man's body to torture him.
That word means, it's the same word as horror, actually.
Harrow is?
Yeah. It comes from the same word as horror, and horror, horror has to do with the hair. Standing on end. Those spikes, the spikes on a coffin, that you put around a coffin, they have a railing that goes around a coffin, and those are what are they called? I think they're called harrows too. Those spikes that stick up around the coffin. Harrow has the what's that little animal that has all the, not the porcupine, but the other little animal that the hedgehog, not the hedgehog. What do they call him in England? The little spiky animal that you find in hedges that has like a porcupine. What do you call that animal? It's the same name as harrow too. I just can't think of it right.
Hedgehog.
Yeah, it's the same name, but it has another name. But it has a lot of, that word has a lot of associations with, but horror is one that's behind it.
That's literally true of horror, that our hair does
Your
stand
hair
on.
stands on you.
That is, we're animals after all. We're rational animals, but we're still animals. And the hair on the back of your head literally does prickle.
The word hirsute comes from the word harrow. Hirsute. Hairy comes from.
Look at a cat, you can see.
Yeah,
bristle.
Bristle.
They absolutely will bristle when they see an enemy. But so do we.
Yeah. You feel your skin prickle all over. Prickles is the same sensation. Something. He says it harrows me with fear and wonder. The fear, not only fear, but also wonder, because he wants to know. See, wonder is a species of fear. And he not only just feels the fear of danger, but he also has the fear that arises from not knowing what this thing is. And that's the exact experience of wonder. It's a kind of fear, but it's a fear that is driving toward some kind of knowledge. He wants to know.
The bottom drops out of your knowledge.
Yeah.
In case you
don't know. Horatio.
I thought I knew. At the beginning, tush.
Horatio is a man who's very confident about what he knows, but now he doesn't know, and now he does want to know.
He didn't wonder up to this point at all.
No.
He had no wonder about ghosts at all.
No.
He thought he knew.
Yeah.
And he didn't believe in them.
Yeah.
But now he does.
And so he's the one who questions it. It would be spoke to, says Bernardo. Bernardo's not going to speak to him. Horatio is an educated man. He's a nobleman.
He's been to college.
And he's the one to talk to the ghost. And Horatio speaks to him absolutely marvelously. What art thou? Immediately he turns to a formal mode of speech. He doesn't say, "Who are you?" He says, "What art thou that usurpst this time of night, together with that fair and warlike form in which the majesty of buried Denmark did sometimes march? By heaven, I charge thee."
What is the nature of high talk? We talked about this way back, I think, especially in Virgil. That is, one of its qualities is that you never say what you mean. And you just said it. Horatio always says what he means. I don't mean that he's lying. What I mean is, instead of saying directly, "What art thou that walk in the form of the late King Claudius?" He doesn't say that. He says, "Together with that fair and warlike form in which the majesty of buried Denmark." You say, "Wait, who's that?" It's all done with language that forces you to move one notch over. You cannot read that language passively. You have to read it actively. It stimulates your active response.
Yeah, well, right away you have to think about it too.
You have to listen and think. You have to respond to those words. The wonder of it is that Shakespeare's audiences could do that. Yeah. As he had an illiterate audience, highly charged, so much better than we are, because we don't have the habit of doing that at all. We're used to having the whole thing spelled out
Yeah,
for us.
that's exactly right. We say, "Oops, where are my footnotes? My kingdom for a footnote, that will explain it all to
We
me."
don't do any work at all.
Or a teacher, who will tell us the whole thing.
And all of our reading, if you pick up Time magazine, or you pick up the Paris Match or the Spiegel or whatever it is, anywhere in the world, the modern magazine, it's all spelled out for you in language that never demands your response. All you do is take it in. All you do is take it in. It's interesting, instructive to pick up a magazine, a popular news magazine, Time or Life or whatever, and just take a look at the language that's used. Never once does it challenge you.
No, you don't feel any anxiety for a footnote. You don't look for a footnote. It isn't necessary. Everything is so clear, so simple, that it's immediately. And if you don't get it the first time, they'll say it again. They'll repeat it in words.
And that's true of almost all the language we hear, everywhere and always. Nobody talks like Horatio.
No, you see, and if you went back and read the North's Plutarch, which was a bestseller, a popular book that people could go out and buy for a penny, Shakespeare and his friends undoubtedly read, you'd find the language like that, like this. You're not going to find it like Time magazine at all.
People talk that way in the pubs to each other.
Yeah. They made these shifts from thou art to the more to you, to the less familiar you, very easily. They could do it all the time.
Where else you can hear that high language, to go back to our circus metaphor, is that barker who stands in front of the fat lady's tent. They have a high talk, and I've never done anything as low as analyze that kind of talk. But listening to it, I have sort of reflected on what they were doing, and that's one of the things they do. Some people say, well, they use big words. Well, yeah, I suppose they do. But they also use that indirection. That is, they don't tell you directly what it is that they're talking about. They have a way of going one notch off from what they're saying. They won't say it's a fat lady.
Yeah.
They'll say they have something colossal and something grandiose and something which is heavier than whatever you could imagine, but they won't come right out and say, look, we have a fat lady here, or we have a snake charmer here. They'll talk about the mysterious East, and they'll talk about the most dangerous and most sinuous. I can't imitate it. I wish I could. I've lost it altogether. But anybody who's ever heard one of those guys knows.
Well, and they talk it. They speak it in a sing-song. They have a pattern.
Rhythm.
They have a sing-song. Hurry, 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 ladies and gentlemen, step right up here and see the exotic mysteries of the East. You'll see, and they begin to tell you about all the things.
It's a wonderful thing to hear, and it's the last vestige of this kind of talk. You talked about the sing-song, and we really must go back over that. And gosh, I don't want to be too much of a school teacher, but underneath all of this talk is our old friend that is, this is all written in an iambic verse. Now, it's not strictly speaking verse. He breaks it off, but it isn't prose either. That is, go back to the beginning. Who's there? Nay, answer me, stand and unfold yourself. Long live the king. Bernardo, he. You come most carefully upon your hour. Go back. You come most carefully upon your hour. That's an iambic pentameter line. Nay, answer me, stand and unfold yourself. Now, he's not, I don't think he's counted. I don't think Shakespeare deliberately sat down to do that, but he's such an English poet. If you keep it up, it scares you to death.
See, when he says,
every line.
Have you had a quiet guard? Not a mouse stirring. Francisco finishes the line, you see. One person will start the line, and the next person will finish the line. He does mix prose.
Have you and quiet, guard, not a mouse stir. There's a little feminine ending, but that's an iambic pentatonal line distributed between two different speakers.
Yeah.
He doesn't do it all the time.
No.
He does break it, but
No, well, of course, the next part, all this part, friends to this ground and liegemen to the Dane. This is very sing-song. Friends to this ground and liegemen to the Dane. Marcellus answers, and Francis says, give you good night, O farewell, honest soldier. Who hath relieved you? Bernardo hath my place. Give you good night. Hola, Bernardo. Say. The third person comes in.
The third person picks it up. Yeah.
What is Horatio here? A piece of him. See, they go on. It's like a duet. Absolutely, like a duet.
All the way through this
line. Shakespeare. Now you will get prose. Now I don't know when the first time you get prose in this play is. It goes on, all the way through the first act. It's all verse. It's all verse. I don't know where you get
it's such unobtrusive verse. I mean, I don't think you'd even know it was there. You don't think of it as verse when you read these first few lines.
No, not at all.
But it's there.
They're such short speeches.
Yeah, but it's marvelously there. It's a music that is written, as it were, underneath the words. If you get too conscious of it, it can perhaps spoil it. But in a way, it's not a bad thing to get conscious of it and then forget it, something like that. But in some of the lines that come up as being particularly poetic, then it really, when yon same star that's westward from the pole, and you think, boy, that's just pure poetry. That could be a line out of John Milton or somebody. Even in a line when Horatio talks to the ghost, question at Horatio. Horatio says, what art thou that usurpst this time of night, together with that fair and warlike form, in which the majesty of buried Denmark did sometimes march by heaven I charge thee speak. I mean, it's all absolutely there.
Yeah. No, I was trying to find. I've never done it before.
The first prose.
You don't get prose up until Act 2. Scene 2, when Hamlet's talking to Polonius. It's a comic scene, a kind of frivolous scene. Polonius comes on the scene. He says, this is when Hamlet is reading. He says, what does my good Lord Hamlet? Well, God of mercy. How does my good Lord Hamlet? Well, God of mercy. Do you know me, my lord? Excellent. Well, you are a fishmonger, says Hamlet. Not I, my lord. Then I would you were so honest a man. Honest, my lord? Aye, sir, to be honest, as this world goes, is to be one man picked out of 1,000. And it goes on. The whole scene is in prose.
And he's crazy. He's pretending to be crazy.
The prose, sometimes...
It's not his normal speech.
It's not his normal speech. Sometimes prose is meant for a kind of low comedy, although sometimes he'll say marvelous things. His great speech on...
the Gravediggers are all prose, for example, in that famous speech.
Yes.
I don't mean to say that his prose isn't great, too.
No.
But I think you put it this way. Poetry is the normal speech of man.
Yeah. Although, as I was going to say, one of the greatest speeches in Hamlet, one of the most famous speeches in Hamlet is, what a piece of work is man. That's been so quoted so often, and it is a glorious speech, but it is in prose. What a piece of work is a man. How noble in reason, how infinite in faculties, in form and moving, how express and admirable in action, how like an angel in apprehension, how like a god. Beauty of the world, the paragon of animals, and yet, to me, what is this quintessence of dust? Man delights me, not me, no, nor woman either, though by your smiling you seem to say so. It is a grand piece.
That's a piece of rhetoric.
It's a piece of rhetoric, but it has grandeur about it. So that Shakespeare is a great master of either one.
I wonder why he does that.
I don't know. He's talking to Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, of course. And
I wonder if there is
some
significance, although I wouldn't
There always is. Yeah. Sometimes it's easy to see. He'll just.
Well, when he's being crazy, it's a beautiful example.
Yeah.
That is, crazy people can't speak poetry because they're crazy.
Yeah.
And poetry is the language of the rational animal when he's at his norming.
Yeah. Yeah.
So a crazy person or a drunken person, and the low comic characters
Low
are usually
comic.
drunk.
The drunk in the scene, in Macbeth, where the drunken what do you call him?
He sinks into prose.
He sinks into prose. He comes with that
He answers the door.
marvelous speech when he answers the door and pretends to be the doorman in hell.
Yeah.
A very funny speech that he has. That's prose. So you get that kind of thing. But in this play, actually, very often there's much more prose mingled in with the verse than there is in this play. This play is
mostly verse.
Almost all verse.
Yeah. And it is a wonderful thing to forget it, and then as you're reading along, to be sustained by it.
Shakespeare does that on purpose sometimes because he wants to remind you. You can tell the difference. The minute someone starts speaking prose, it comes as kind of shock to you, and then when they go back into verse, you say, "Oh, there, we're back in verse again." You hear it if you're listening. See, if you're not listening, you won't get it at all. You have to be listening.
I know I've heard it said that in producing these plays, that American actors are almost impossible. That is, you can't find normally you can't find an American actor because he hasn't got any habit of English as a musical language at all. Whereas the British actors do better, the Irish actors especially. They're able to do that more naturally.
Yeah.
I remember seeing a movie of one of Shakespeare's plays. I guess it was Julius Caesar, and it was a mixture of famous American and British actors, and it was hilarious, really. An American actor named Marlon Brando, who came up from the method school of acting, which was a New York academy where actors were taught by Russian agents. I think they were communist agents who came to New York to start a proletarian theater. That's what it was. It was an American version of the so-called Marxist theater, and they trained these fellows to act in tough guy proletarian plays. And they cast this fellow who was pretty good at that sort of play, but they cast him as Mark Antony, I think. Wasn't he? I think he was Mark Antony.
Maybe he was.
And John Gielgud, the old British actor, was
he Brutus?
No, it was even less. He was Cassius.
Ah, yes.
Yeah. And Cassius is not one of the. I mean, you have to say it's one of the leading roles, but you would never believe the interpretation that came out of that movie. That is, by the end of the movie, you thought that Cassius was the most important man in the play. he walked off with the play, because he could recite those lines with such a magnificence.
Yeah.
Whereas poor Marlon Brando just couldn't do it. There was none of that.
The method actors had learned what they have learned is to talk down.
No, something less than prose.
They often mumble. Marlon Brando is famous for. He's a mumbler. He's been ridiculed and parodied a million times because of kind of. I think he has speech impediment.
He probably cultivated.
When he talks in this kind of mumbling, growling way, and it's become characteristic of him. It's hard to make him out. But I think that's a deliberate thing. That is that it's like again I was comparing a student to Sylvester Stallone, the modern idea. He talks in this kind of funny, really low class way. It's like a constant dialect. It's like he's deliberately trying to talk in a low way. Now Shakespeare has low characters who talk in a low way, but boy, as we were just saying a minute ago, the doorkeeper in Macbeth. Oh, what an eloquent man he is! Even drunk, he has a marvelous eloquence about him. His language, he imagines that he's the doorkeeper of hell, and he makes such fun of it. It just becomes a delight.
How much he knew.
Yes, exactly. Oh, yes, he knew all about hell. Being the porter. He knew his business.
The only literary antecedent, if you could call it that, would be Christendom. That is, it's not literary but cultural. All these people were educated in the school of Christendom. They did know about hell, and they knew things from the Bible. Now, the Bible was not read, as a matter of fact, in Shakespeare's day. It hadn't got started yet. But they knew it from their religious life. That is, they knew the stories, the biblical stories. And from the stained glass windows and the illustrations
and hearing it read all the time.
And hearing it read all the time, as you say.
The other thing you have to realize is that this is oral English.
Yeah.
These people knew how to talk. Chaucer, we've already mentioned this about Chaucer. All of the people in Chaucer, from the most ignorant up to the most learned, they know how to talk. And part of the reason for that is they have not been spoiled by books. A person who spends his life, and I mean his whole education, reading books silently, never hears that language. They don't hear it. You're taught not to move your lips. If you move your lips, the teacher says, don't move your lips, because you're not supposed to. It slows you down, and the idea is you're supposed to read this as fast as you can. And so as a result, this language is something you never hear. People read it, and if they read it with their eyes entirely, and they don't hear it with their ears. Well, if your whole education is simply silent reading, you can't talk. You've never learned to speak. And it has a devastating effect on language, on eloquence. Shakespeare and all of his age, and you could say the same thing, Chaucer's age, had a marvelous eloquence because they talked to one another.
All they did.
They didn't read books. If they went to church, they heard the gospel read aloud to them, and they heard Latin all the time, whether they understood it or not. They heard the marvelous sound of that Latin all the time. They heard it chanted. They heard the Psalms chanted, and they got to know. They knew what those Psalms were. They heard them year after year after year from the time they were
that whole Christian culture is behind Shakespeare. Yeah.
And it is an oral culture, whereas ours is a written